Okay, welcome to everybody for the latest instalment of our Indonesian Social Science Seminar Series, or IS4. Sponsored by the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre, the Cornell Southeast Asia Program and KITLV, this series brings together social science experts from around the globe to discuss pressing issues facing Indonesia and foster new opportunities for networking. I'm Michelle Ford, the Director of the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre and your host for this seminar. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and would like to begin by acknowledging their continued custodianship of the land. Before we start, I'd like to introduce Dr. Natalie Pearson, who's SEAC's curriculum coordinator, but also the president of Australia's Indonesia Council. Natalie would like to say a few words about next year's Indonesia Council Open Conference and hopefully encourage you all to join us. Natalie.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Michelle and Iqra, for the opportunity to share some information about the Indonesia Council Open Conference, which is coming up next year. So the dates of the conference are the 26th and 27th of September 2023, and I'm really delighted that this conference is going to be co-hosted for the first time by two universities. So it's going to be co-hosted by the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre here at the University of Sydney, as well as the Humanitarian and Development Studies at Western Sydney University. So one of the really exciting things about this conference, as we've come to expect in a way, is that it is hybrid. So I know many of you are joining us from outside Sydney and even outside Australia. You can still attend the Indonesia Council Open Conference. My colleague is going to share a link to the conference in the chat box, so please take a look at it. And the call for abstracts is currently open until the 15th of February. The theme of the conference is Indonesia 25 years on, and that's of course 25 years since decentralization. Another thing I'd like to emphasize about the conference is that it's multidisciplinary. So there's lots of different themes that we've identified, themes as diverse as migration, cities and urban living, social movements, and Indonesia in the world. So take a look at the website, please put an abstract in, and we would really love to see you there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Natalie. Ariane, I might get you to put another message about that later, seeing we're still having people joining us. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Iqra Anugrah, who's an affiliated researcher at the Centre for Southeast Asian Studies at Kyoto University, and where he completed his postdoctoral fellowship. He's currently a visiting fellow at KITLV in the Netherlands, so joining us very late at night, but is speaking to us today about the solidarity economy experiments of Indonesia's peasants and fishers movements. Iqra will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have about the same length of time for Q&A. Please post your questions via the Q&A function, and I'll pose a selection of them to Iqra at that time. Over to you, Iqra.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Michelle and our colleagues at SEAC Sydney for having me. And thank you so much for colleagues, friends, and viewers from across the globe for making the time to attend this seminar. And I'm very pleased and happy to be here. I'm Iqra Anugrah. I'm an affiliated researcher at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at Kyoto University. And today I'll be talking about solidarity economic experiments of Indonesia's peasant and fisher movements in 3 districts. I've been working on this topic for quite some time, and what I'm trying to highlight in this talk is how these various solidarity economic experiments, such as cooperatives and community-run schools, among others, while imperfect, offer a possibility of an alternative economic vision and provide peasant and fisher communities the means to improve their livelihood amidst oligarchic domination and agrarian dispossession. I focus on 3 district case studies, namely Bengkulu Utara in Bengkulu Province, Serdang Bedagai district in North Sumatra Province, and Ciamis district in West Java in post-authoritarian period. Obviously, 3 districts cannot really represent the entirety of Indonesia as a country, but I think focusing on these cases help us to understand and make limited generalization based on these illustrative case studies. And I did some field work in these districts, and basically my presentation is based on my past field work. Now, before going into the details of my case study, I would like to just share you a conflicting picture of rural Indonesia, at least in the post-authoritarian period. In the post-authoritarian period, from 1998 until today, we witnessed a conflicting picture of rural Indonesia. On the one hand, the agricultural sector, which includes farming and also fishing activities, among other activities, remains an important sector in Indonesian economy and society. And in addition to that, rural activism and movements have been pretty active in advocating the rights of the rural smallholders and dispossessed. On the other hand, you have an accelerating and worrying rate of dispossession, such as land grabbing and continuing domination of elite and oligarchic actors in rural politics, especially during the times of local and national elections. And this has been well documented by various agrarian and rural development NGOs and civil society organizations such as the Consortium for Agrarian Reform, or KPA, and the Mining Advocacy Network, or JATAM. But is there more to these stories? I would say yes. I think there's more to these stories. I do agree that oligarchic network continues to substantially shape, if not dominate, Indonesian politics, and feasible vulgar dispossession of land and other rural resources remains rampant. I agree with this assessment, but this is not the whole story. So let's move a bit beyond these popular academic and activist accounts and try to shed some light on how peasant and fisher communities and movements respond to these challenges in multiple ways. So I propose we shift our attention a little bit away from contentious and political strategies of these movements, things such as lobbying, protest, land occupation, and electoral participation, to their economic strategies, such as their attempts to build worker cooperatives, for example, or community-run institutions such as schools. Obviously, these two strategies are complementary, but I think it is important to shift our attention away a little bit to the economic strategies of these agrarian movements. One key concept that I find useful in analyzing this situation is the concept of solidarity economy or economic democracy. And what I mean by solidarity economy is basically a collection of economic visions and practices that prioritizes democratic participation, community interests, and equality over profit motive. And this set of visions and practices seek to provide alternatives to capitalism. A related concept is the concept of economic democracy, which in a nutshell refers to the democratization of profit-making, workplace relations, and economic resources. These two concepts have been well studied by various scholars, such as Emily Kawano and Richard Wolff, the critical economists. And in this study, my focus is on the internal dynamics of solidarity economic experiments. So their struggle to establish these alternative economic institutions and the extent to which they're able to maintain sustainable operation of these institutions. Obviously, I'm not going to discuss about the macroeconomic policies promoting economic democracy, because that will be the domain of the state and other elite actors. And using the typology of the sociologist, the late Eric Olin Wright, his typology of social transformation, I see these experiments as a form of interstitial as opposed to ruptural attempt to promote social transformation. So these experiments by various peasant and fisher movements try to promote social transformation through the building of alternative social institutions, such as alternative economic institutions, as opposed to promoting social transformation by the revolutionary seizure of state power. Let me check them here. So these are the different trajectories of solidarity economy in 3 Indonesian districts that I study. In all these 3 cases, they experience agrarian dispossession in one way or another, such as land conflict with state and corporate authorities, or the declining quality of their livelihood. But the outcomes of these experiments are different. It is less successful in Bengkulu Utara district, and it is more successful in Serdang Bedagai and Ciamis districts. To assess the gains and challenges of these attempts, I developed a yardstick. So I developed a set of criteria based on the literature on solidarity economy and economic democracy. So what are the 5 criteria that I use in this case? First is that these experiments have to promote a democratic arrangement of workplace relations, ownership of assets, and profit allocation. Secondly, they have to promote a conscious vision to challenge market hegemony. Thirdly, these solidarity economy institutions cannot work in isolation with each other. They have to connect with other like-minded institutions or expand their operations, at least locally. Fourth is whether these institutions try to socialize or collectivize care work, including education, which are typically imposed on women or female members of this community. And lastly, whether these experiments are able to maintain a sustainable rate of production or operation of their alternative economic institutions. So this is the yardstick that I developed to assess these 3 case studies. So let me now move on to the first case study, which is the case of Bengkulu Utara district. To give you some background information about Bengkulu, Bengkulu province is a resource-rich province with a long history of rural dispossession, including under the authoritarian New Order government. And in 1997, 1998, towards the end of the authoritarian rule and in the beginning of the Reformasi or the democratic period, the Bengkulu Peasant Union becomes a leading peasant union in the province, advocating for land rights, and they gain the reputation as one of the major advocates for this particular struggle. And Bengkulu Utara district was a major part of the struggle. In Bengkulu Utara, rubber farmers affiliated with the union, with STAB, for some time occupied unused plantation estates in the district. And in 2011, 2012, when the rubber farmers heard that a palm oil company called Peasant planned to take over these unused plantation estates, they opposed the plan, and they started their advocacy and campaign to maintain the ownership and access to their land in these plantation estates. So starting from around 2011, 2012, the North Bengkulu branch of STAB and the union members, the farmers, participated in a wide range of protests and lobbying, and sometimes conflict with the corporation and the district government. And after some time, after this series of protests and lobbying in 2013, the union and the corporation, mediated by the local district government, agreed to provide an enclave of roughly 1,200 hectares of land to the peasants. So this motivated them to start a cooperative to organize rubber production, the selling of rubber products, and communal profit allocation. But the plan did not really materialize, did not really take off due to a number of reasons. One is that the unit itself tends to prioritize its advocacy and political agenda, such as advocating for land rights and participating in electoral politics through various means or various ways over its economic strategies. So economic strategies, in a way, came as an afterthought for this union. At the same time, there was a desire to return to normalcy for members in North Bengkulu after the land conflict. There was a lack of material incentive to build a co-op in the view of a lot of members in the district. Some were interested in forming a union, in forming a co-op, a move that was supported by the union. But for many others, they prefer to maintain their individual household autonomy in the distribution, in the production and selling of rubber products. So this plan did not really take off in Bengkulu Utara. In contrast, in Serdang Bedagai, we see a case of successful solidarity economic experiment. Like many other coastal communities in Sumatra, Serdang Bedagai fishers in Serdang Bedagai district experienced the boom of shrimp farming, especially Asian tiger shrimp in the 1980s. So they jumped on the boom. They built shrimp farming ponds, but instead of profit and good livelihood, what they got instead is the destruction of their mangrove forests, and they were unable to get profit from this economic endeavor. So economically speaking, the impact was pretty devastating for this fishing community. And this led several community figures and leaders in the village of Senagalawan, a village in Serdang Bedagai district, to start their own mangrove forest preservation in the 1990s. And this became the foundation for their later activism. When democratization came in 1998, the political openness provided opportunities for this community to play a major role in fisher rights activism against big industrial players, and this also motivated them to think about expanding their areas of activism into economic activism, and that's why they decided to start their own fisher cooperative. And this cooperative basically succeeded. To give you some context here, initially there were two co-ops for female and male fishers respectively that were founded in the early 2000s to serve community needs in savings and loan, for example, and develop mangrove-based food products and snacks that they can sell. And this experience served as a foundation for managing a cooperative, and this coupled with a British Council grant that they won in a business in a business proposal competition, totaling around 100 million rupiah, allowed the community to have some initial capital. So this initial capital, coupled with their experience, allowed them to basically reconstitute the two co-ops and expand its operation. So the two co-ops were reconstituted as the Muara Baimbai cooperative, and through this cooperative, they were able to expand their operations. So now, in addition to selling food products and savings and loan, they also manage a number of other businesses, and the most famous one is ecotourism, run and managed by the fishers. And to date, Muara Baimbai cooperative has been successful in the following fields. First is the sustainable and profitable operation of the co-op based on workplace democracy. And let me just cite some statistics from a number of studies, including a study conducted by UNDP Indonesia about the success rate of this cooperative. So in data from 2018, for example, mentions that the co-op's operation contributed to the rise of average household income of not only the members of the cooperatives, but also other residents in Sayanagalawan. So the average household income rose from about 30,000 rupiah per day in 2005 to 100,000 rupiah per day in 2018. So pretty substantial rise. The co-op's ecotourism business, as of 2016, brought in about 100 billion rupiah per month, and the dividends or the profit obviously were paid to the members of the co-op. So it was a pretty profitable and sustainable operation, at least prior to the COVID pandemic. They were also able to maintain a control over external capital. In this case, the grant from the British Council. So the grant did not create conflict in the community. The co-op was able to use the grant for its operation. At the same time, while improving their livelihood, while expanding their co-op, this community has also been able to maintain their activism and connections with other social movements. And what is also important is that this co-op and this community have been able to center the role and labor of women, of the female fishers in this endeavor. The last case study is Ciamis district, which is another case study of successful solidarity economy experiment. Ciamis is part of the Eastern Priangan forest region in West Java, where peasant communities have suffered the impacts of corporate plantation expansion, especially under the New Order authoritarian government. And like many other places in Indonesia, the Serikatan Petani Pasundan, one of the big or major local peasant unions, emerged as a response to this challenge. And this union has been playing a significant role in peasant activism in the Eastern Priangan region, including Ciamis. And in particular, in Ciamis, the SPP has been active in the land occupation of the state forestry companies' estates or perhutanis estates. And this conflict was going on for quite some time. The peasants who conducted land occupation campaign in perhutanis estates were met by state repression as well. But finally, it led to some settlements in the form of land title distribution, covering roughly around 100 to 400 hectares of land in 2016 and 2019. So that was the rough timeline of the land conflict in this district. Now, the community school system of the SPP was built in response to the community needs to provide basic education for children of the union members and the SPP members, and to answer the need to train future cadres, future union organizers in this region. And in Ciamis, the local SPP peasants, so peasant members of the union, built a middle school in 2004 and a vocational high school in 2007. Initially, they found it difficult to legally register these schools as schools in the Ciamis District Educational Board, but they managed to do that, and both schools are still in operation until now. And the schools have been governed on a democratic basis and financed mostly by community members. And graduates from these schools serve as young community organizers for SPP. So, for example, in Ciamis District, this vocational high school, once the students graduate from these high schools, some of them and more of them go to university, go to college for their further education. And while working on their education at universities, they also serve as community organizers for the union, for the SPP. So in that way, the union ensures that their activities are going on, and they have enough members to conduct these activities. And what can we learn from all these stories? I think there are several insights that we can take from these stories and several questions to ponder. First of all, is whether these successful local experiments will withstand the challenge of scaling up their operations beyond their respective local regions. Secondly, translating anti-capitalist or populist economic visions into actual community organizing methods, organizational management, and local practices can be difficult. These experiments might be prone to appropriation by a more neoliberal, let's say, vision of economy. Thirdly, the internal dynamics and the agency or leadership of local movements and communities matter in shaping the outcomes and trajectories of the solidarity economic experiments. And lastly, I would argue that there is a need to combine solidarity economic experiments with social democratic policies or politics backed by the state itself. And these three examples are not the only successful examples of solidarity economic experiments. Some other successful examples include a credit union by the Aryo Blitar Farmers Association in Blitar, and a fisher co-op by Puspita Bahari, one of the leading women fishers organization in the MAC. So there are other examples of successful solidarity economic experiments in other places as well. And I would like to conclude by mentioning a couple of things. Is that first, when I would say that when solidarity economy and the broader economic democracy are not prioritized as a main agenda for rural transformation, then the chance of survival for these local experiments is rather slim. And lastly, I hope this initial conversation, this study, which I hope to turn into a journal article, provides a modest corrective in addition to the ongoing conversation on oligarchy, agrarian dispossession, and rural movements and communities in Indonesia. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge my my funders from the following institutions. I would also like to thank my local interlocutors and friends on the field, without whom this research will not be possible. And I will leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Iqra. I might get you to put down your PowerPoint. And in the meantime, we've got one question in the Q&A, but please feel free for other people to add your questions. There's a lot of time available for really good discussion here. But Arini from UGM in Indonesia has started us off. She's keen for you to explain the difference between Scott's version of the moral economy and the way that you employ economic democratization in your research.
Should I answer now?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you so much for this question. I really appreciate it. That's a great question. I think well, there's an element of moral economy to some extent in these projects, especially in these experiments, especially the notion of a decent basic livelihood. But I think there's more than that as well. In that in these experiments, there's a conscious attempt by these local movements and communities to improve their livelihood beyond their basic needs. And in some cases, at least in the three cases that I'm studying, for the union leadership, for the community members, or at least some members of the community, such as the community leaders or a significant portion of the community itself, I think there's a conscious vision and effort to combine this economic activism with their earlier, political or contentious activism. So in a way, I would say that these movements, these communities, at least when I spoke to them, they see this economic activism as an integral part of their political activism. So I think those are the similarities and differences with the notion of moral economy by Jim Scott.
Thanks very much for that. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll ask the really sort of detailed one first. I'm curious, to what extent do the solidarity economies that you describe emerge spontaneously, and to what extent were they seeded or driven by an NGO or other outside party?
That's a great question, Michelle. Thank you. I think it's a combination of both, really. I would say that even from the onset, even from the initial years of the formation of the unions themselves, right? At least in the case of North Bengkulu and Ciamis, we already saw this alliance between peasant farmers and let's say middle class slash NGO slash student activists, right? So it was a joint project to begin with. Now, which actor has greater influence in shaping, the trajectories of these unions and later on these solidarity economic experiments, right? I think it depends on the political conjunctures that they face at any particular moment and time, and sometimes the actual results of this collaboration in the form of the kind of organizations or tactics that they promote. This depends on the political events that they face at any time, and this also depends on the strength of each actor themselves. So demands from the mass base of these unions, for example, are something that cannot be ignored by the middle class activists. At the same time, I would say that certain types of organizational arrangement or tactics actually come from the activists. So I would say the activists have more influence in promoting certain types of organizational management or visions. To give you one concrete example, the cooperative in Serdang Bedagai in North Sumatra, it was a pretty bottom-up attempt. So initially, these fishers came up together and they thought, well, we should start this mangrove conservation effort, and then later on they thought, well, we should expand our cooperation. Let's build a co-op. But then for technical assistance, they would approach NGOs in Medan, for example, the capital city of North Sumatra, to ask for their technical assistance. That's how, for example, they found out about the British Council grant competition that they won. They already had the community leaders of that fisher community. They already had in mind, the kind of businesses that they want to have, but then they needed some assistance in writing the proposal. So they reached out to NGO activists in Medan to help them in writing the proposal. So that's how it works, I guess.
Thanks for that. Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please type it in the Q&A box and I'll read it out so that everyone can hear it. In the meantime, I can indulge myself a little more and ask you, Iqra, in scholarly terms, is there a danger in obscuring the role of these external players in your analysis, whether it be at the very beginning or later, as you've just described, in the provision of technical assistance? And I ask this because sometimes there is a tendency in the literature to valorize the role of the grassroots and not to show the complexities, both positive and negative, of their interaction with other actors and the networks that those actors bring. So do you mind just reflecting a little bit about the scholarly choices you make when you reveal or obscure those roles in any particular context? I'm not suggesting in your broader work, but in, say a presentation like today's.
Sure. Obviously, I write more about that in my paper, in my working paper, and I hope at some point it gets published so that colleagues and scholars and activists can read, can understand this complexity. But yeah, that was one of my concerns, and another concern of mine actually is whether whether I over romanticize these local experiments, right? So one could say in the grand scheme of things, these are, you know, local experiments, and these are outliers, rare cases that do not reflect, you know, the struggle of smallholders in Indonesia. And as you mentioned, even within these cases of local victories and successful experiments, you should also mention the complexity of interaction between the external actors and the grassroots communities themselves. I totally agree with that. But again, I guess what I'm trying to do here is just to provide a modest addition and intervention to the again, oligarchy-centric and dispossession-centric conversations of Indonesia's rural political economy. So showing this side and obviously acknowledging the complexity that you mentioned.
And of course, you know, I'm very sympathetic to the academic endeavour of showing the alternative to the oligarchy framework. But we have a great question here from Kairu Subandi, who's at UNSOED in Central Java. And they ask, is it possible to create a stronger solidarity economy at the village level and a more diverse and dispersed economic sources, using more diverse and dispersed economic sources, so it isn't dominated only by richer villages? And this, they suggest, would also mean that those richer villages would have less chance of dominating village level politics and beyond.
Sure. Again, that's another great question. Thank you so much for that. I think our colleague here at KITLV, Ward Bernscott, actually writes on this topic as well when he and his and other colleagues highlight how pilkades, how village level elections have become more interesting in recent years, because we see a new phase of elites or contenders coming from outside the old elites, the rich villagers in these villages. And another colleague of mine, Mukhtar Habibi at Gajah Mada University, actually also works on this topic, showing the increasing rate of class differentiation in a number of Indonesian villages, and shows how in community meetings, for example, poorer peasants or poorer villagers try to challenge these richer villagers and this old power structure. And from my own field work, and this might be anecdotal, I also witness and encounter attempts by social movement actors or local members of peasant unions, for example, to participate in village elections and try to use the village head office and its administration structure as a way to transform village life and make it more equitable. So there are attempts of doing that, of doing exactly just that, the description that our colleague just mentioned in his question. So right now I'm also working on another paper on electoral participation of agrarian movements. I mostly focus on local and national elections, but I also have some data on village elections. So it would be interesting to see how this dynamic unfolds. So yeah, I think there are ways, there are good news from the field, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay, the questions are flowing a bit more now, which is fantastic. And again, great quality. Clara Siagian asks, you mentioned that one of the challenges is scaling up. In your opinion, is scaling up necessary? If yes, for what? Isn't there an argument to be made to keep these initiatives grounded and localized instead of scaling them up, which might disrupt their organicism, agility, and perhaps their social accountability?
Well, yeah, that's another a great question. Thank you, Clara. I think I have a conversation a bit with Clara years ago on Twitter. I think that's the dilemma, right? The point that is just mentioned there. I think that's exactly the dilemma. scaling up the scale of your activism sometimes might not be necessary. Studies on Indian farmers movements or peasant movements, for example, have shown that in the case of organizations of richer farmers, scaling up their operations means that they neglect the actual organizing work on the ground, right? So that kind of situation might happen. At the same time, I think it is also fair to say that these experiments cannot stand on themselves, right? So if these experiments are limited to local regions, there is also a question of the economy of scale, and to what extent by focusing on local region they are able to maintain a sustainable rate of production and operation. So that's exactly the dilemma, and I think the answer is that it depends on the kind of organizations you have, the kind of community needs you have, the kind of commodities, for example, that you're dealing with. So those are the considerations that these actors perhaps can think about when they're making the decision to expand their operations or maintain the current size of their operations.
Okay, our next question's from Carol Warren, and I encourage all our other listeners to get their questions in. But Carol asks, what is the attitude of these organisations towards engagement with global markets through certification systems such as fair trade, forest and fisheries, stewardship, RED, etc.?
Thank you so much, Carol, for this fantastic question. In the case of these three case studies, at least until the end of my fieldwork period, so I haven't updated my data. I haven't really spoken with them yet these days. They don't really engage with these international schemes, but I know in other contexts, for example, they do participate in these schemes such as PES, for example, payment for ecological or environmental services, which is a mini version of RED Plus, you can say. There's a lot of considerations when they join these schemes, and sometimes it's funny because in some cases, my colleagues, my friends in Bantaeng, for example, the activists involved in the PES scheme in Bantaeng, many come from we can say radical background, say that they see this as a means of struggle. They see this as a vehicle that can be used to improve the livelihood of local farmers or local peasants in their community. So in a way, there is some sort of pragmatic engagement with these schemes. I think some activists would disagree with this tactic. Those who participate in these schemes, I think, are pretty aware that there are all sorts of complexities and correlations, and perhaps the risk of getting appropriated by more neoliberal logic by participating in this scheme. So they're well aware of that. But at the moment, as sort of a pragmatic tactic, they see this as as a vehicle that can be used at least for their short-term agenda or strategies.
Okay, thanks for that. For our listeners, I should have said before, if you'd like to post your question in Indonesian, that's also fine with us.
Yeah.
In the meantime, another question from me. I'm very interested, of course, in your new work on agrarian movements and electoral politics. Do you have any initial observations to share?
Thank you so much. I'm still working on data collection for this project, and I'll use this as an opportunity to advertise my project. I presented this in a conference earlier this year, and a great colleague of mine, Amalinda Safirani, actually made great comments on my paper as well. So as of now, I've collected data of around 70 agrarian organizations, roughly defined not only, this includes not only unions, but also, other types of organizations such as NGO, form coalitions and organizations. I try to track the kind of engagement that they do in electoral politics. So whether they field their own candidates or whether they support other candidates, things of that nature. And my initial finding is that roughly half of them, or 40% of them, actually prefer to support other candidates than fielding their own candidates, at least in local elections, which I guess shows the continuous pattern of electoral engagement, the type of electoral engagement that these communities and movements tend to use, at least in the post-authoritarian period.
Okay, Cameron McGaw, who's a PhD student here at the University of Sydney, asks, in some of the case studies you talked about local mangrove restoration by the Solidarity Economy Collective, was there traditional knowledge in that place sufficient to work with the current ecological conditions to restore the mangrove, or was outside knowledge needed to understand how to adapt to climate change impacts? How did these knowledges intersect?
No, thank you, Tamara. That's a great question. I haven't really looked at it thoroughly yet. When I did my fieldwork in North Sumatra, I was mostly focusing on the COP and the kind of contentious politics that they've been participating in, and their attempt to intervene in local elections. So I haven't really looked at whether some sort of outside expert knowledge is needed by this community in their mangrove preservation effort. I'm pretty sure that some NGOs eventually help them out in providing, some sort of technical assistance in mangrove preservation effort. I'm not exactly sure what types of technical assistance that are provided or that were provided by them, but at least in the initial years of the mangrove forest preservation in the 1990s, it was basically a community endeavor. So it started out as a community endeavor, driven by local knowledge, but later on, I guess it developed into something more complex and interactive. But again, I haven't really looked at the details of that interaction yet. But a great question. Thank you.
Okay, we're getting towards the end of the session, but we still have time for any last questions. So if you haven't asked one yet, or even if you have, feel free to pop another one in the chat. But I'm getting a lot of airspace here, which of course is great. Often don't get that as a chair. But Iqra, can you tell us a bit, bouncing off that last question I asked, what about the intersection between agrarian movements and other kinds of social movements in that broader political sphere? Is that something you're interested in or monitoring?
I mean, I'm really interested in that. With regard to the 3 district case studies that I'm studying, these movements they do and they did ask for assistance with from other agrarian movements or organizations. So the type of engagement that they have is still pretty much limited to interaction with other agrarian organizations or movements or communities. I've heard stories from interlocutors from France on the field that activists or union members plan to, for example, make a joint rice distribution effort between a particular peasant union and a particular labor union, for example. So, but I'm not sure exactly how, whether that plan really took off or not. So, I guess there were talks about that, about the possibility of forming intersectoral collaboration in promoting solidarity economic experiments. But yeah, I still need to look deeper into that interaction.
Okay, well, we might draw a close there, Iqra. Thank you so much for your great presentation and for the really thoughtful discussion about both the topic of your paper, but also your broader work. For everyone else, if you were not online, but when we were talking about the Indonesia Council Open Conference, that would be a great opportunity for you to come and present your work to a very vibrant group of Indonesians. And Iqra, of course, we hope to see you there too. Thanks, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you soon at another IS4 seminar. Have a great day.